let's get started.
It's gonna be fast.
Really fast. No, no questions. Questions for smart people. Don't do that.
You know what sounds good right now is some candy. Something sweet.
Y'all can start.
What?
I trust you guys to make the best decision possible.
All right, quick. Have all discussions before Hollins gets back.
It's a good discussion though, Gary.
All right. We are transitioning into our work session on the superintendent's evaluation template. Well, good. Board members, you have a draft in front of you. That is a result of Vice Chair DePass and I meeting with Superintendent Armstrong and looking at a template recommended by school partners. Using that template, we took our board goals, Superintendent Armstrong's priorities, and our desired characteristics that we identified when we drafted the superintendent profile to create this draft. Tonight, I hope that we can agree on the template before we move to the data required to measure progress. We also want to decide on the timeline and the cadence for any check-ins throughout the year. Everyone ready?
Yep.
All right, discuss away. I want also just kind of a quick reminder. These are just the goals, right? And then as the board decides on the goals, that's when we can reiterate what I just read here. That's when we can start discussing or getting looking into what kind of data would provide feedback for those goals. I want to make sure we set the target first before we start doing the work.
So just a quick question. When you sent it out, you asked board members if we had suggestions to send it back. We're just starting, those were just sent to you, but nothing's been incorporated or anything?
Yeah, this is just for us to discuss.
Okay, so we didn't really need to send stuff. I mean, if we send some things, we need to raise it.
Yeah, because I think one of the issues was that if people were sending it to me, it could spark a serial conversation. Which, right. Yeah, that was my mistake.
So I'll just jump on the first page on the goals. What are the baseline numbers? So we had, I'm looking at the two columns, the results. So we had baseline numbers for each of those. Are we reestablishing those? And if so, what are they? I mean, I'm assuming they are what they are, whatever the baseline numbers. And then the ratings, we had agreement on, or in the other evaluation, basically, if there was X amount of, say, increase in third grade reading in the subgroup, it would correspond to one of these categories. And so, because the column is blank, I'm curious, are we carrying over those from the last evaluation of like what we had already set?
So my understanding is that this is a new template and we're starting fresh. We have a new superintendent.
Okay, but I guess there's nothing there, so then my question is, I'm just asking, like, are we gonna use a similar methodology, which is, so for example, third grade reading, to get to an exceeds expectation, we had a scale, which is like 0 to 0.5 increase was, does not meet the expectation, say, or if it was an increase of 1 to 2%, it was meets expectations.
So it'd have
I'm
a
asking-
scale.
Yeah, so there's no scale, that's.
Yeah.
And I'm asking, are we gonna use something like we had before, or? No, it's a new form.
Yeah, that's a great question, and may I ask, and perhaps maybe, this is a great place to just maybe restart and start. Just want to acknowledge our chief of all the things, research, accountability, assessment, racial equity, and justice. Yes, all of that. Dr. Adams. Dr. Adams was instrumental in using the template and putting the language in, and I was just wondering if he could just give a quick little, just frame of the content that's in, and then some thoughts, and then he's also here as a resource, too. Dr. Adams?
Sure. I believe, Director DePass, it was you who shared this template from School Board Partners with the superintendent for consideration as for consideration as the evaluation template. One of the things, and so this is set out in 2 sections and is designed, as I understood it and read through the School Board Partner materials, as a evaluation that would look at evidence and then form a judgment based on that evidence, which is different than the previous template, which did turn things into a little bit of a mathematics
Yes.
problem. And so this template didn't really lend itself to that same mathematical jigsaw. So that wasn't necessarily included. But as Director Wong said and mentioned, we did identify 4 priority goal areas. And then we did think it would be, with Chair Wong and Vice Chair DePass's feedback, advantageous to talk about, when it talks about core competencies and descriptions, to talk about those core competencies that the superintendent search revealed from all of the feedback and engagement with community and others to that regard. In terms of, to Director Brimmer's question about evidence for the board goals, we will continue to provide updates on the board goals. For example, when the OSAS embargo is lifted, it was scheduled to be lifted this Thursday. They just notified us that it's not lifting on Thursday and it'll be sometime in October. But as we bring for example, the OSAS data, we will talk about the 3rd, 5th, and 8th grade board goals in late January or early February when, depending on the release of the graduation data, we'll talk about that graduation board goal and also the post-readiness board goal. So as I experienced the template and the materials that were surrounding the template, it would be my understanding is just as a principal or a supervisor would be gathering and collecting evidence along the way to go into the evaluation, the board would be gathering that same evidence along the way to go into the superintendent's evaluation template. And my other understanding is that Superintendent Armstrong would have the ability to do a self-evaluation, and then the board would do an evaluation, and then the board would come to some kind of consensus around what her actual evaluation and rating would be.
That's correct. The other thing about this, so it doesn't on the, there's no mention of like financial stability like our last template had, and I don't know how important that is for people. But this is intended to be a co-creation between the superintendent and the board, not a punitive document. It's literally meant to identify areas for growth. And recognize positive attributes and growth along a curve in terms of student achievement. The best practices for the use of this particular template are to have regular cadence of meetings with the superintendent. So every quarter there would be a meeting between the board leadership and the superintendent where we're talking about measurement. We're looking at data along, so it's not a big lift at the end of the year. It's also intended for all of us now tonight to provide input, anything that we think is missing. I think the scales would be important to put in there so we have something to measure. It needs to have a quantitative aspect to it. Oh, and I'm sorry, and fiscal stewardship is located
I was just
in the
about to
corner.
note that.
Yes.
Should I just jump in with?
Sure, but I want people to understand that this is different than what we've had in the past. And again, it's meant for the board and the superintendent to work together to in service of all of the children of the district.
Whenever we get a chance, I just want to note that my hand is up. So I'm just throwing it out there.
Do you want to call on
Go
it?
ahead.
Oh, and you're on mute. And also, Herman, you can speak to this.
What's that?
I said you can speak to this, Director Green, because you're familiar with this tool as well.
Yes. So I just want to be clear on like when we start looking at it, when we start thinking about numbers and how to come up with something, I'm from a real low level layman's type term. The whole point of doing this for me is that within our school district, we got a bunch of illiterate black kids running around. We got a bunch of people saying that we got great kids and we got wonderful kids. And at the end of the day, these kids can't read and they can't do math, and they're graduating without being able to read. And we can say whatever we want to say, but at the end of the day, I talk to parents that are telling me that their kids are leaving high school and they can't read. And so the whole point of this tool, in my mind, is that we would establish a baseline where we can get in front of this and we can begin to say unequivocally that this is what we are intentionally going to be doing to ensure that every student that leaves PPS is going to be able to read and do math. So I'm not here to, in my humble opinion, what I want to get to at the end of the day, and I'm just throwing this all out there because she just got here. Kimberly Dr. Armstrong forgive me. I have no right to just call you Kimberly. Your name is Dr. Armstrong. And so Dr. Armstrong just got here, so I understand that we can't hold her to the same things that we were doing before. However, I don't want to lose focus on the point of this for me is that we get to the place to where we're stop saying that our kids should be able to read at a proficient level by the end of third grade, and that we get to the place where we're saying that they will be able to read. Because right now, black kids are like 30% below white kids, if not more in some areas. So do whatever you got to do, call it however you want to call it, say whatever you got to say. I don't care. At the end of the day, I need to make sure that black kids are reading. And I want to be very intentional about it. And I think we need to be scoring it because the thing that you measure gets results. And if we're not intentionally measuring it, then it's not important to us. And so call it whatever you want to call it, say whatever you want to say. But at the end of the day, we need to start regulating. And every meeting, we need to be pointing out, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're ensuring that black kids are going to learn how to read, and that they're going to be able to do math, and that when they leave here, they're going to have a diploma that means something. So I just want to be very clear on that. We need to say that at every meeting, and we haven't been saying it, and it bothers me. And so we need to be talking about the fact that our kids, a lot of our black kids are illiterate, and call it a baby ugly. It is what it is. But until we start doing something about it, we just gonna be making excuses for why our kids aren't reading. And it's not Dr. Armstrong's fault. She's here. But this evaluation is because I want to tell her, and I want to tell everybody that she works with, that reading is important. Black kids being able to read, black kids being able to do math, black kids being able to do science, it is an important part of why we do what we do. And from the top down, we need to make it a priority. We need to get away from the language of they should be and get to the language that says they will be, because that will change everything that we do. And so I just want to say that, put that on the record, because I don't care about the blank spaces. Make sure the kids can read.
So I'm in agreement with Director Green, so I'm not ready to leave the board goals and the student outcomes that we set. I think it's, as Director Green suggested with the new superintendent, like obviously we have a baseline year. But I also think that if we're not, it would be a huge departure for us to decide that we're going to change the superintendent evaluation, not to be focused primarily on student outcomes. And again, I think every superintendent in their first year, you get a baseline year, and then every new year, there's a discussion with the superintendent about sort of where we the expectations on student growth. But I think we need to keep putting the baseline numbers in there so we know exactly where we are. I think one of, in the 2010s and 14s, the previous superintendent, there was a lot of outstanding evaluations. And if you looked at student outcomes, it didn't reflect that. So for my preference, and I know there's other items in here, but that we continue to measure, but knowing with the calibration that this is a first year. But to be clear, and if we were going to switch off of the student outcomes that we talked about, I think it necessitates sort of a separate maybe conversation, because we've tried to orient our budget, our contracts, aligned against that. And if that's not also what we're saying to the superintendent, is like, this is where the focus should be, then I think that's a bigger conversation than just the template.
So I like to make sure I'm following the conversation correctly, because we do have sort of priority one that says demonstrate improved achievement in accordance with the board goals. And I'm hearing board directors saying we're not focused on the board goals, and I'm just feeling a little confused.
Yeah, I think nobody here wants to not measure achievement. I think everybody here is very concerned with that. Director Green, I mean, literally everyone here. So I don't think anybody's suggesting we don't measure anything, or that we don't start with the baseline and measure from that baseline. I think rather we're using a different tool so we have different outcomes. And this is
The way it's structured,
we
it has
don't.
goals and then results, so that, my suggestion was that we drop the baseline, and maybe I misunderstood Dr. Adams. I mean, you said like throughout the year we'll be dropping these in, but it seems like we have baseline numbers from last year, or like that we can drop in.
We will soon when the embargo lifts.
Okay.
That'll be our data from last school year.
And again, it was supposed to be out on Thursday. It's not going to be out on Thursday,
To
but
be
it
determined
should
at
be
this
maybe
point.
by the October 8th.
They just said until October they'll let us know a date.
Okay.
And then on priority one, it has high school graduation. And originally we had sort of indicator, college and career readiness data. And we've had lots of conversation as a board that high school graduation, since all you have to do is get a D, that that wasn't the sole measurement of our students being ready when they left. So I would hope that we would have some of our college and career readiness indicators in here besides just graduation.
So these are the current 4 board goals, 3rd grade, 5th grade, 8th grade, and high school graduation. And then there was also an agreement to report on post-secondary readiness when the board adopted the goals for our students. So, I mean, anything you all want can go into the template.
Well, part of our
Right.
board goals had 8th grade readiness. I didn't see that on the evaluation either.
Can I ask about the baseline data, just going back a little bit? So I think I heard you all say that last year's data would be first year baseline data for me, as opposed to where our students are at. Are students this academic year with me where they end up this spring?
Well, so we need to have some baseline, right? So would the OSAS data that's coming out soon, would that be the same as the end of the year data?
No, the OSAS data that's coming out soon would be data that was born out of the administration of Guadalupe Guerrero and Dr. Husk.
Okay. And so how,
Yeah, that would be the
that would, yeah, what would you suggest that as best practice in terms of establishing, a fair baseline for year one?
Well, I think what I'm inferring from Dr. Armstrong's question is whether or not the baseline can be based on a year of students under her administration.
Right, rather than someone else's.
Well, I guess I'm thinking about it as far as that's the baseline of where our kids is at. doesn't matter who administration it was, this is where our kids is at, and this is where we should be working, place where we should be working from. It doesn't, for me, it doesn't really matter if we wait a year and do a baseline, because our kids are at that today. And so for me, the baseline would be wherever they're at today, moving forward.
Yeah, the only reason why I asked that, though, is because I get that point. However, then the evaluation is then based on the data that comes out this time next year during the transition year. And so all what I've been advised is that, and of course, it's board's decision, but all what I've been advised is that the first year transitioning in is the year where, you know, you're collecting data, you're learning system, then once that data is set, now being a year in, I have the opportunity to reset program and make some changes so that I can be impactful at growing the number. Because we know that what we have been doing hasn't been working. The data has shown us that over and over again. Maybe in some areas there are some, like our curriculum and some of the high leverage practices and some other systems, and we're seeing some small growth in that. But we also know to get the numbers that we need, there's going to have to be some major disruptions. Those aren't disruptions that I'm making in this year as I'm learning the system and transitioning it. But I'm happy to lean into whatever number.
My question becomes then, because I want to, this is not about, this shouldn't be looked at as a penalization, right? Like, I want to know, like, what is it that what's fair, what's appropriate, and then keep in mind that if we're saying, okay, I need time to put this together, what are we intentionally doing to make sure that kids can read at the end of this year? Like, I just want to we need to be very intentional about making sure that we're doing, I don't want to wait a year and be like, okay, now I see that it's a problem. It's been a problem for like 25 years, if not longer. So we know that there's a problem. They're illiterate. They can't read. And I'm going to keep saying that because it's true. The data says that it's true. The percentage of people, it is not where it needs to be. And we need to call the baby ugly. It is what it is. What are we going to do? What is appropriate? What is sufficient for the first year? And I don't care if you come up with it. I don't care if you say, okay, this is what I plan to do the first year. This is how I'm going to do it. These are the level of gains that I believe that we should be able to see. And this is what I'm going to go. This is what I'm going to go after. And then whatever you feel like it is, then let's go with it. But we just can't, just be okay with these illiterate kids running around here. I'm not okay.
I get what you're saying, and I just want to say, just because we say we're going to use these numbers as the baseline, it's not a penalization number. It's just this is where our kids is at. I think we have to really be honest with ourselves and know we're not going to always get to whatever the board goals of 5%, 3% every year. It might be 1%. So I think we have to have an understanding as well that just because we have a baseline where the kids are at now, we know it's going to take time to close those gaps. And I think we have to make sure we understand that. We're not looking for instance, if, the goal is 5% and we get 2% or 1.5%, that's not a good thing. So I don't know if we're reading in this way too much, but knowing that our kids is going to take time because the gap didn't happen in 1 year or 2 years or 5 years. So I think we know that there's a level of timing that is going to take to close the gap for our kids, because it's not just school, it's all social economical variables and stuff as well. So I think if we not worry so much about what the number is this year versus the process we're going to use to get our kids to where they need to be.
But that's what I'm saying. That's why I said I don't care about the number. I want to know, what are we intentionally doing, right? Like, I feel like we need to spell that out for me, and we need to spell that out for the community. Like, the number, it might fluctuate.
All right, thanks. I'm going to agree with everything Gary said, and I'm going to reframe it just a little bit, because I think what you're hearing, Dr. Armstrong, everyone on this board wants to see growth as fast as we can, including this year. You, I know for a fact, want to see growth, including this year. I want to make sure we're not falling into, and I appreciate, you're talking to folks that, you want to be cautious in your first year. But I also want to make sure that we don't lose a year during a superintendent transition. Superintendents turnover, I'm not suggesting you will, you're going to be here 10 or 20 years, but superintendents on average turn over like every 4 or 5 years. I cannot believe that every 4 or 5 years you see a dip in student achievement as like the whole point is to put those systems in place where you're seeing that constant improvement, and then new leadership can come in. You might tweak things, you might make changes. And so I guess that's what I would say. I want to see the improvement. The community wants to see the improvement. Our kids need to see the improvement. So we have to use last year's data. You don't own last year's data. I don't know if last year's data went up or down. We're going to find that out sometime in October. You don't own that, but I do think you own what happens this year. I also think owning what happens this year and explaining the changes you're making, as a result, those things can go hand in hand. So, I mean, personally for me, I think as a board, we set the aggressive goals, right? And I don't remember exactly where they were. We go back to look at what they were. If it was 3%, 5% growth, I think you and your team strive as hard as you can to achieve that. If towards, as we're going through the year, you're not seeing that, then that's also a time to have that conversation with us to say, hey, we're pushing really hard. We're not necessarily getting there. Here are the changes I'm making as a result of that, right? And I'll just tell you as one board member, like that's an explanation, as to why we're not there. But on the other hand, we have a lot of good systems in place that a lot of the team that you still have put in place, and I'm hoping those are working.
Well, I appreciate that, and I will say that I appreciate high expectations and aggressive goals. That's why I'm here. I also want to note, just as superintendents change seats, so does board members. And so I want to make sure that whatever instrument we're designing and creating and crafting, that it's not setting, it could potentially be a pitfall in the future. So I'm not saying lower the expectation or change, but I feel like it sounds like there's two things being described. One is a work plan, and the other one is an evaluation template. And an evaluation, in my mind, is what it is. I'm either exceeding, I'm meeting, or I'm failing, and that's the way that an evaluation tool should be used, right? I appreciate opportunities to come together, have conversations, give updates, and at the end of the year, it's did she make the mark or not?
And I think
Right.
that's why it's important what Director Burnett was saying, if we have those matrix for meets, particularly meets, exceeds, well then that's how you get it. So for instance, if it's like it's 5.5, well, if we went up from 0 to 1 point, that could be partly makes. If it goes up higher than that, that could be meets, or whatever those matrix are, to use that for that same, evaluation process.
I would say this. For a superintendent 5 years in, it's, as Guadalupe's was, it's very different from a first-year superintendent. But I think I'm in complete agreement with Andrew about the value of it. But I think it's that right-hand column that could be different, say for a first-year superintendent versus a superintendent who's in their third year, who's drafted the budget, negotiated the contracts. So I think that's where we take into that column is where we take into account like sort of expectations of what you're doing that first year, but there's still expectation of moving forward.
Yeah. Can I just real quick on the, I actually don't like tying at scale to the achievement because I think there's a lot of unknowns. I didn't like it when we did it with Guadalupe either. For me, my own perspective is we set board goals, maybe that's 5%. And that's what we're all striving towards. If we hit the 5%, that's great. Clearly something's going right. If we hit 1% or let me put it, if we hit flat or down, we're all failing. It's not a you thing. That's a district failing. But if we get 1% growth, we set a target of 5. That doesn't mean I don't want to be locked into, oh, I've agreed that that's a failing grade for the superintendent, because you may come back and say, with a whole bunch of explanation as to all the things you've done and all the work. And I might say, you know what, that's an exceptional superintendent. Similarly, if we go 3 or 4%, but there, for some reason we feel like there could have been more, like I want to be able to say, well, actually, I feel like we didn't push hard enough. So just for me personally, I didn't like that, we're gonna pre-establish what the rating is based on the goal. I think we set a goal, we try and achieve it, and then the evaluation is about how close did we get and why. And I want to be clear, we're not setting a goal for you. We're setting a goal for the district, and that's a goal for us as well. Because that also makes us complicit in terms of, did you get what you needed from us to achieve that goal?
I appreciate that. Sorry,
Yeah.
just can
Well,
I
it-
respond
yeah,
to
go
that?
ahead.
Just
Yeah.
really quickly, I appreciate that, and I think that's meaningful. And I just hope that there's some calibration so that it's not all completely subjective. Like some may disagree, but I actually like ratings and numbers because I want to be clear when I set something. It's like everyone agrees, like based on our calibration and our agreement on this matter, she has either met or exceeded in the column. Otherwise, it opens up a lot of subjective and, as boards transition and the next set come in and they may have different feelings about a 1% or a 2% or a 3%. So I think my only hope, and I hear that in the evaluation, I also have robust work plans and other things and other work that's happening with the team where our work is very focused and strategic. I just want to make sure that the instrument at the end of the year communicates clearly to me that all 7 agree, whether it's, meets, exceeds or not, or fails, or whatever the words are.
Yeah, I appreciate that too, and I appreciate you to Director Scott. So because we're non-educators, non-administrators, I'm also hesitant to use a number scale to determine success or not along, meets or exceeds expectations. But rather, I think we want to look at the data points, and if the curve is going upwards, the points between, October 24 and October 25, that there's a positive increase along a growth curve. So the more data points we have a trend. We'll know if things are going up or down or staying flat.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, and we have Dr. Adams, who knows how to do this kind of testing to see if we're making progress or not. And that's what we want, is progress. I don't think we have to set a percent. And we know that there's been so much going on with reading and with training the teachers and new curriculum, same with math. So we know things are happening. Now, maybe there won't be any change. Maybe all those things that look wonderful, to me anyway, maybe it's not going to make a difference, and then we're going to have to rethink it. But right now, let's see what happens with all the stuff that Guadalupe brought, that you're continuing. And, I was saying it has to be a certain percent seems ridiculous to me. But definitely we want to see growth. If we don't see growth, we know something's wrong.
Yeah.
So just interesting that the conversation, because like when we look at all kind of assessments, they're all part of percentage. So as a school district, we use it for grades, right? We use it for, sports, all kind of percentages. So why would we move away from that if that's what we use now? Now maybe you change how you get to those percentages, but
to answer that question, if you wrote a paper for English class, 10-page paper, and you got it back, and all it said on it was C, you have no idea what you did right, what you did wrong, what you need to work on, right? So, one of the things that is utmost important to me about evaluation, because otherwise I kind of feel it's a waste of time, is that an evaluation has to give feedback so that the superintendent knows how to grow, right? It has to be repeatable, something you can do every year. So I'm going to use a basketball analogy because I know you play basketball. But if I had someone taking stats on me and I was practicing and playing when I'm playing games, and it showed my free throws are 97%, but my 3-pointers are only 5%. Well, I can lay off on practicing free throws for a while. I can now work on my 3-pointers. I get, sorry for the sports analogy. But I guess my question goes into, and this is for both Dr. Adams, Dr. Armstrong, if we just have a 10-page paper and you get back a C, you have no idea, okay, I'm doing okay in this, I'm not, you have no idea. So like, when we look at this template, my question is, what are some goals here, competencies or whatever, that we can collect repeatable data that can show where growth is happening and where holes are happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I do appreciate your analogy, because I'm not going for a participation trophy. So I want to know that the game is being won, right? Championship team. So the way that this instrument is laid out, that there's 4 priorities, and they're basically based on the strategic plan, or 4 strategic prioritized areas. I don't think that that was before you all before. We layered in board goals under priority 1 that deals with student outcomes, and then it brings in the 3 other priorities where we as a district team are hyper-focused on the work, right? So all the things happening around professional learning and developing a workforce and retention, like those are numbers I would love to be able to see and celebrate how we're retaining staff and growing that culture. There's also community engagement. I don't know if there's some surveys or perception data or some other quantifiable things that we can pull forth. But what this does is it pulls in all 4 of the areas that me and the team are already building work plans around, and also layers in the board goals so that they're not 2 separate documents, but they're all infused together. That shows a comprehensive look towards just the goals that we're setting forth. I don't know if that answers your question, but I just wanted to, I don't know if that was obvious before.
Yes, thank you, because I think that part kind of needs a little expanding, because I think that it's not clear when you just look at this document. I mean, I know a little bit from discussions with both of you about this. But yeah, absolutely. So like, you know, like I you know, Director Green, I want to appreciate you all the time, because, you know, bringing the issue. But, you know, we hired Dr. Armstrong because this is also, you know, the issue you're describing is something that's corely important to her as well. So I guess I'm going to back up a little bit, because I think the COVID shot is starting to get in my head. Starting to get a little fuzzy. What are, I guess, I was looking for a little bit more specific, like, for example, when you mentioned authentic and inclusive leadership, right, on the second core competency, right? Like, what would the data collecting for that kind of look like, if that makes sense?
May I
You know,
offer?
like sorry.
Oh.
Because I know, like, for example, like we mentioned before, there's a lot of like a lot of established work that has been done in, say, like, for example, like climate surveys, right? Done with focus groups, so that it's done, you know, not just randomly, but actually scientific, social science, scientifically, which we always call soft science, and so that it is something that is reliable and repeatable, or at least, you know, plus or minus a few percentage points. So yeah, I'm just curious about, like, if you already have some idea for some of these, like, which ones and how would you collect that data?
So, yeah, that's a great question. So we wanted to list out the goals and make sure that we represented the board goals, but we didn't go into, like, what that would look like, because we figured that would be something that the board would want to craft and design. We can certainly go back and make some recommendations, but, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I also would want, I know that you all would need to know, like, what are our work plans, and how is the work being focused and elevated, to then determine now how do we quantify or, you know, qualify that.
I mean, I guess what I'm looking for in priorities 2, I already talked about priority 1, but 2, 3, and 4, the goals are very high level and somewhat generic. And so I would expect in that middle column, not, we're going to throw in evidence along the way that works, but what, at the start of the year, what at the end of the year would we expect to have seen in terms of developing a diverse, high-quality, thriving workforce, what evidence would be presented to show that? Because I guess I love that you're into sports analogy, because I never liked participation in trophies either. But I think that's sort of what activities, just doing activities or measuring activities is sort of a participation trophy. And so it's like, what do we expect to see? But in order to do that, I think we have to understand at the beginning of the year what that is versus at the end of the year, like, oh, here's something that changed, like picking out one piece of evidence that may prove a point, but it's not actually what we wanted. So I would expect on all these, we'd have something really specific. And I'll just say on number 4, I think it's somewhat mushy in the sense of, like, community engagement to do what? So that our students and families feel more included and welcome and understand, how their students are doing, but like, for what point? That we have community engagement so that we pass a bond. I want to be much more specific about the purpose of it. And I think there's some things from the climate survey we could use. We've got lots of data. But to me, frankly, it just would be so subjective. You could come up with 7 different board members and a superintendent with 7 different ideas about, whether it knocked it out of the park, or like, I don't see any evidence that changed. So I would really want those to be more clear in fairness, and I guess
Or
then
we
I.
just take them out.
Well, we believe what, so we believe what Director Brim Edwards is saying. I think, as I said earlier, though, that we wanted you all to put the numbers that you all felt like what your expectation is of me when it comes to some of these areas that are listed here. I mean, I can come up with my own expectations, but I thought that maybe that was the space for you all to then weigh in and put your percentages and numbers, and whether it's, retention, whether it's, looking at our evaluation process and how many teachers or administrators move from, plans of improvement to back to performing. I mean, there's lots of data in the system that's collected that speaks to how well we're doing with diverse, high-quality workforce. And some of these others, there's lots of work that's going on with special education, community schools model. And so, but I think
Just so we get clear, so you kind of want to move away from more of the subjective stuff to more concrete. Hey, if we have, 100 black teachers right now, and we move to 150 type of evaluation versus a lot of the subjective stuff.
well, that's why we left priority 1 board goals. We just said third grade reading. We didn't put a percentage because we figured that
It's
is
already there.
the board for,
Yeah.
should there
I
be
agree.
a number or some data set that you want to examine that sits within a priority. Our focus was making sure that we represented 2 things: the strategic plan and the board goals. And also, if you look at dispositions, as Chair Wong has said, the competencies and dispositions that was listed from the community engagement process for the search.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear again. So I love that. I love the fact that if we're looking at the board goals, the evaluation piece, we should have goals for her, or set goals for her. So then it was easy to quantify what she did. So, and I like that. I think for some of these things, it's really subjective. So either we take out a lot of subjective stuff, or we come up with targets for her to hit. So that way it's just clear, and of course, always, when we look at results, and go back to Director Wong's analogy, if you get a C, but if you're showing your work, right, then you can show, as far as math, you get a C, but you're showing your work, and the teacher can come back and say, oh, you know what, you forgot to divide here, or you forgot the times here. It's kind of the same analogy. So I would love to, like, try to take out a lot of the subjective stuff and then come up with quantitative goals or stuff we set for her, and then that be that.
Well, and all of them actually could have a
Not 3 5
quantitative
pages.
piece. I mean, that was the way that they were set, to not be subjective, but for you to add in, for instance, the priority 4, community engagement, that's definitely a first-year priority, right? Schedule and attend listening sessions with community leaders, parents, and stakeholders. Should there be a number? I think we talked about, and as you all know, as I presented in the board meeting, that goal number 1 is building trust and relationships, right? And I know that it's more than attending, but I would think that you all would have an expectation that I'm out in community, that I'm in spaces, that I'm meeting with people. My question is, what is that expectation if you were to quantify it? Would you want to see at the end of the year that I've attended 50 different things, 60,
Right.
200? And so I think that was the hope and the design in all this. Now, we could have, if there's something completely different, that's definitely for you all to say. But that's just the thought process that went behind this. And that communicates to me, like, it's really clear on what the expectation is of the board for me in this first year.
I'm really curious, thank you for that. I'm really curious what we already have data sets for, so that climate survey. One of the things we heard before you came on was our former superintendent didn't get out in the community very often. And we didn't have, like, you should do 15 meetings a year, because that's just measuring, it's just a count of meetings. But for this particular, for the community engagement, we could measure, there is a question on the climate survey about generally, it's like a customer satisfaction question on the survey. And we could look at that data point. Does that go up or down? Is there a more positive rating of the school district as a result? Because we could both count community engagements that you are proactive about, or that your availability to, rise to the moment in the moment if there's an incident or something. And we could also look at that data point in the climate survey that gives us a number, a percentage rating that goes up or down or stays flat. I don't know if we could use both. And Director Hollins, I agree with you that we should quantify as much as we can. And we should also, I think, look at where we already have the data. Dr. Adams, you might have a better idea, but where do we, are there some of these areas, for instance, on improving the workforce, that we could actually, the retention, we could measure the retention? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's one that we already have data for, and we will have continue to get, to gather data.
Like,
Sound like
I would
those-
just say, I'm going to follow just on the community engagement though, just one point. I mean, I feel strongly that, like, one of the outcomes of the community engagement should be we pass a bond this May.
But that's not repeatable.
That's a board.
It's one thing, I mean,
That's a board thing. I thought.
it's not a board thing. The type of bond that we pass and what our community thinks about the district will make a difference about whether we can gain support for it, whether we can raise money
I
for
agree,
it.
Yeah, but the superintendent's not even allowed to, she can't even campaign for it. It's illegal, so.
And what
She
we-
can certainly set the community setting in a positive way.
Between now and
Well,
May?
All of these things actually are not just the superintendent's responsibility, let's just be clear. But to me, that's like, if the superintendent goes and does 50 school visits, and we have a bond package that gets referred that the community doesn't because of, cost overruns and something, or they don't feel an engagement with the central office, or the way their schools are staffed, or whatever, if there's not a good feeling, that impacts whether we can pass the bond or not.
But then
I
how
mean-
do you, like, for instance, if people don't want to pass it because they don't want their property values to go up, and, those other variables are, inflation is up, and so I can't afford, more taxes, so I hear what you're saying, but I
I'm
just
just saying,
don't think
it's
you put
a
that on the
non-subjective
superintendent.
data point, and to me, I think it's great to go visit schools, but you can have a superintendent who is not actually improving the environment and the broader community that visits all the schools. And so to me, it's not necessary, I don't like the visited a certain number of schools, because it's like, for what purpose and what's the outcome that we're hoping for from those visits?
So I guess one of the questions is, how do you quantify if it doesn't pass? How do you validate that as far as the superintendent responsibility if it doesn't pass? Like, what matrix are you using to say, well, it didn't pass?
Well, I think the
so
same one that you
superintendent didn't
outlined
do-
of, like, walking through, and as Dr. Wong said, like, showing the work, like, hey, we from a staff level, we set this up, we demonstrated, we showed how we spent the 2020 bond funds, we've, done X, Y, and Z from a staff level. I mean, there's lots of things that staff does to set things up. But for me, some of these other ones, we've had beloved superintendents who haven't accomplished a lot of things related to student outcomes or moved the dial on some specific district initiatives. So that's what I'm looking for.
Well, so,
I'm sure you're going to be beloved and effective.
Yes.
But just beloved is not going to help our students.
so maybe one of the most important pieces of this is section 4, Board of Directors feedback. And it's asking for the superintendents to please share feedback for the Board of Directors on their work with you this year. What is the Board of Directors doing well in the support of your work? How could the Board of Directors support your work more effectively? And to what extent the Board of Directors tailored their management approach to your leadership, philosophy, and background, I think is important.
Well, I think
It's
absolutely
feedback
important, and
to
I
how
would
it's like almost an evaluation of how we are operating in
Except
concert,
for-
in
What I would
concert with,
ask-
in concert with the superintendent.
Can you just finish up, like, about 10 seconds, because I really kind of need to move on. We're kind of talking in circles now. I think that's one point, and it's fine, it's a good point. I think you should submit it, but I think we as a board need to come up with a method of agreeing. So one thing I'm going to propose, everyone kind of do homework. All these points on here, I don't know, tell me if you're okay with this or not, but because of meeting laws, you can't email me. So I was hoping maybe I could volunteer Roseanne. If everyone can email Roseanne a version of this template with your score on each item about how important it is to you and how, or maybe you want to take it off. So like maybe a scale from 0 to 5. 5 being like, this is of utmost important, I'm keeping this in here. 0 being like, I want to see this erased. And if you want to add stuff, you're welcome to add it as well. And then if there's a lot of things added, we'll have to figure out how to get that out to the board and talk about it. Maybe we have to do it in a meeting. But if everyone can just send their ratings for each item to Roseanne, how does that sound?
Can I ask a question?
Sounds good. Could we also say, like, how we would measure this too in different
I think
spots?
so the issue we're dealing with right now is that the point of this draft is to figure out what is a priority for this board, like what are the goals that we want to measure, and then once we decide which ones are the most important to us, then that's when the conversation about how we're going to collect the data and what we're going to measure comes
So is it
next.
really just the left column that you want us to focus on?
Yes.
Because, okay, because
Yes.
once we figure out what's in the left column, let me just ask
Because
a
we have a lot of
question.
experts that can really expand upon how to collect this data.
So then the other question I have is, I'll just say, we have 4 priorities and then all these competencies. Do you want us to rank the competencies and which ones we'd want to keep
Yes.
as well?
All of them, every single line. Obviously, if you don't want any of the competencies, you can summarize. But I think the whole point is like, I want to get feedback so that we have some kind of thing that we can work off of, so that next time we can start narrowing down or expanding which goals that we really want to prioritize, and that way we can move to the next step, which is figuring out how do we collect this data, how do we collect this feedback.
May I ask a clarifying question? Most of the conversation tonight has been on the goal section, and that's where the conversation has been focused. The competency section are the criteria the community said they wanted to see in the superintendent. So I would, if I may, I would urge the board to try to keep those, because it's what community
That's-
said they wanted to
yes.
see. And I wonder if the conversation and further discussion and deliberation is about the goal areas. I'm hearing, and we all agree that student achievement is a prominent measure and the measure. We know we have, because I have to sit here and tell you all the news all the time, we don't have enough of our students on grade level, and we're not going to be satisfied until those bars are at 100%. We've got to figure out how to get there. And so I wonder, for example, the board could decide, well, we want each of the goals to be one of the board goals. That could be something you all could talk about if these other things feel not concrete enough, because then you still have the competencies and these other priority areas that are aligned to the strategic plan can be discussed as a part of the self-reflection of the superintendent and the conversations about how we're trying to get to the board goals. So I just wanted to offer that.
And I would just ask, so when we talk about the competencies, how do we quantify that? How do I judge authentic and inclusive leadership? How do I judge transparent, ethical, and courageous leadership? How do I quantify that?
It's not going to be a number, sir.
No, but I'm saying, how do I, is it just, once again, is it subjective how I feel about her at the time?
It would be based on, hopefully, evidence that the superintendent, Dr. Armstrong, will provide as she has tried to demonstrate that competency. One of the things that isn't in this template are the descriptions of the competencies. I was trying to sort of not give you three-point size font to make everything fit. But there are a little bit of a more description in the superintendency search criteria. And I do think, in my experience, evaluation does come down often to judgment, right? Teachers make judgments about student progress, principals make judgment about teacher progress and standing, leaders make judgment about their staff's progress and standing, and it's usually some combination of a goal that you set or a couple goals that you set and competencies that you've demonstrated throughout the course of the school year.
Yeah, I agree. It's, thank you. Just for the sake of time, if there's further questions, you can send it to me. Roseanne, well, sorry. Yes, send it to Roseanne. The commentary on the draft evaluation, send it to Roseanne. We have one last item, it's just 5 minutes for,
Eddie, are you leaving this topic?
yeah.
Okay,
just for the
because
sake
I
of
have
it.
two things sorry, since this
Be
is,
quick.
well, this is the first time we've had just a public discussion, so I would like to ask on the Board of Directors' feedback. Just like I think the fair thing for the board to do is to tell the superintendent, here's what we expect when we evaluate. I would like to understand from the superintendent, like at the beginning of the year, how she would answer that question. Like, what would the board supporting your work look like? So if we get to the end of the year and the question is like how the board did, just like I think it's fair for us to say to the superintendent, like, here's what our expectations, like, we think this is what success looks like. I would like to know from the superintendent what success looks like. Versus at the end of the year, as Eddie, as a teacher, Director Wong, like finding out at the end of the classroom, like he didn't understand what success looked like. So that's one thing. And then, I don't know if people saw in their email, but Liz sent the provision in the contract that has the when we have to inform the superintendent when they do their self-evaluation, and then the date then we're going to perform an evaluation. And I think the next board discussion, we need to have that timeline set out so that we're following the contract, again, in fairness to the superintendent. And the last thing is there was a mention that the quarterly meetings would just be with board leadership. And again, I feel like it should be with the full board as sort of best practice to have those, you know, not an evaluation conversation, but how are things going? Again, hey, you guys, you're not looking like this isn't feeling very supportive, or this next quarter, here's what I'm going to need in terms of support from the board on X, Y, and Z. But I think those are conversations that should happen with the full board and just be part of, there was a great, I think, Andrew?
Chair Wong, sorry, I need to go. Was there another agenda item tonight?
Yeah, Patty wanted to schedule time for our board evaluation, and that's it.
This is super quick. So I sent you the information about the self-evaluation, and I just wanted to know, would you rather have the discussion on February 11th or February 18th? 18th is a scheduled work session, so we might have something else going on. The 11th, there's no meeting scheduled. And the person who would be doing the work with us said that you can do it either way. It has to be a public meeting. And the only thing with doing it when there's already a scheduled work session, it might already be full. And she said it usually takes an hour and a half to 2 hours to go through the
Either one
discussion.
works for me.
What
With-
dates was those again?
Going ahead and doing the February 11th.
Oh,
So February 11th would mean that would always be doing that day. So, okay, all right. I told her I would call. No,
Yep.
because.
Either works for me.
I have to,
No, but
Let her
is it
know.
already a dedicated day, or are you asking?
I'm
Are we adding something?
the 18th is a dedicated day. The 11th is.
we'll be adding.
The 18th, say,
The
a
11th
work
or the
session,
18th.
so we can look at, I don't know if we have, we have some stuff on there, but I don't remember what it was.
Okay.
We can look, if there's space, then I say we just schedule for the 18th.
And then not have to
And
have
if
another.
it can't work on the 18th, then we'll ask everyone to schedule on the 11th. Does that
Okay.
sound okay to everyone?
Okay, I'll
Okay.
talk to you about
And
what.
Director Britton, my words, I did take note of what you said. I think that's great feedback.
So I'd like to finish my comment, since I was interrupted, and you just moved on to the agenda item, that at the end of the evaluation that we had last year, there was sort of a cadence and a timeline. And again, I think in fairness to the superintendent, we need to have that outlined. It's already the end of September. And I don't think we should have another meeting where we're talking about the evaluation again without looking at that timeline and when our quarterly, and get the quarterly meetings on the calendar. Again, this is in fairness to the superintendent, versus just letting it slide, which has happened in the past.
And then I think also Roseanne is at the.
I'm trying to get clarity on due dates for sending feedback to me. And I'm hearing that this, not ready for a vote on the 8th. Sounds like there's more time. So just
Yeah, let me check this out.
schedule time for discussion and further refinement. Is that what I heard?
And can I just get a clarification? We're ranking the 4 priorities, or can we choose option B, which was what Dr. Adams offered, which was the board goals are one, and then the competencies are something else? Is that what our choices are?
It was really using the board goals, I thought.
Thought it was using the board goals as, that we were evaluating on those.
Right, and then the
Each-
competencies, but we'd be getting rid of priority 2, 3, and 4. That's what I.
That's what I
heard.
understood as well.
That is what I mentioned, yes.
Yep.
They will become the priority, right? So board goal 1 will be priority 1, board goal 2 will be priority 2.
Yes.
Right, but it would be essentially, I'm just trying to understand the assignment. So at first it was rank the 4 priorities, and whether we want to keep them or not. And then Dr. Adams recommended actually doing the board goals as the 4 priorities and keeping the competencies as well. Is that what we're choosing between?
Now I think I'm going to say all of the above. Because I think if there's enough board members that wants to move to that option, just doing the board goals as priority 1, 2, 3, then we'll move to that. But if the majority of board members are in favor of keeping this and maybe weighting some and getting rid of some, then we'll do it that way. So I think whatever you want sounds right. You could do both. You could have, I want this, you know, the board goals would be priority 1, 2, 3, 4 as like my top, but then my second would be like, these are the ones I want. You can, I would say send it to Roseanne, and then we'll have to figure out some way to tabulate.
So I'm wondering, I know that we're already extended on time, but it sounded like just listening that the board has more of an appetite for board goals and things that they can directly measure. Because the other one will need to be workshopped and find new measurements and other ways to, so I'm just wondering if there's enough here that can lean into Dr. Adams' recommendation and make a decision on that. Or if you feel like you still want, because if that's the case, then people can give feedback on that, which is the recommendation is really take the 4 priorities, make them the board goals, keep the rest, and then give feedback on that.
I'm gonna go with Dr. Adams. I'm just throwing that out there. That's gonna be my vote. That's what I'm sending in, because I don't care if everybody likes you or don't like you. If the kids can't read and everybody likes you, then it's irrelevant anyway. So I'm gonna go with the one that Dr. Adams suggested.
I like that too.
At the same time, we're still keeping the core competencies? Is that what the suggestion was?
Yes.
Okay. So my question would be, which one would be more useful to you?
I think the board goals will be useful, and we still need to have another conversation about those as well, and making sure that we're looking at how things are trending and setting high but realistic expectations.
And I also, I'm not very, because I'm not an educator, I'm not really gonna be the best to set a number on what it would be, because in my mind, it's going to be match it immediately. But I know that's not even close to realistic, so I would actually prefer to get some guidance, because I also wanted to note that the last numbers that were set, we didn't set. The superintendent set those. So the board did not establish those numbers. We didn't say that this is what we thought the percentage was going to be or that it should be. The board did not do that. The superintendent set, the sitting superintendent set those numbers, and the board adopted them and agreed to them. And so I'm not good at setting the numbers. I just want to hold people accountable to what we feel like we should be doing.
Thank you for that background.
That's great, and I just want to add that we probably will sprinkle in some things under those board goals. So if we're looking at 3rd grade reading, not just necessarily just a finite number, but like, you know, other items too that look at things we're moving as it relates to literacy for our 3rd graders too. So, but we'll have to.
That's why we have you, because you already know the stuff that I'm trying to get to, and I know that it's something that is extremely important to you. So I don't feel like I'm too far out of line with any of the stuff that I've said. I feel like it's preaching to the choir, but even the choir needs rehearsal. So I'm just putting it out there for all of us.
And so, just to be clear, are you planning on taking action on this on October 8th?
That's a good question.
Well, it's that or it's the 22nd.
Right. So I guess the goal is to come up with a final draft and approve that on the 8th.
Yes, I think that's, yeah, because we're in later quarter.
Well, I'm
That's the goal.
totally confused, because it sounds to me like you're saying, forget 2, 3, 4, totally? We're not even
So
gonna think about
this
them?
would be 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, you could say these things are.
I mean, there's things in 3, 2, 3, 4 that I really like. You know,
Okay,
like
so
support
all
and
we're
structure,
interested in is the board
staff, personnel,
goals.
professional well-being,
and
success.
The rest, we're just
I don't know.
winging
It's
it.
a tough one.
It's just as soon as you can.
So we have nothing to send to Roseanne, correct?
Not really.
How about you could,
Well, we don't want to just send stuff to Roseanne just to send stuff.
yeah.
Send me a hello.
May I ask, I can we just really quickly hear, Dr. Adams' recommendation? That's our data guy.
Oh, okay. So my recommendation, based on the board's discussion, is to remove in the draft, the current priorities 2 through 4, to place each of the board goals singularly as a goal area in the goals section, and to keep the competencies for the superintendent search based on the community feedback that went into the selection of Dr. Armstrong.
I agree with that. I will add to, I would want to know once again how we measure those other competencies. You know, that the community, because community is not going to be the ones that's doing the evaluation. So as a board member for myself, I would want to know how to measure those other competencies, unless we're just saying they're just going to be, you know, specifically, can't remember the word.
I mean, some of you, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's ways.
So, yeah, I think,
Perfect, but.
yeah. So that, I haven't clicked on the link that says criteria, but I think I mean, I haven't looked at it, but I think that there will be some things in there that will be measurable. And I think it's important to show the community that, you know, this is what we heard, this is how we made a decision to hire, and this is what we'll be evaluating on. I don't know what that looks like yet.
Yeah, I mean, some of the core competencies are repetitive too, of priorities 2, 3, 4. So it probably includes it already. So I'm okay with it too, moving to.
So you got a little
Dr.
bit better
Adams'
understanding, Patty? You got a better understanding?
Better, I'm not sure I agree.
Okay.
So when I'm looking at that next superintendent criteria, there's bullet points under each one of the, you know, experience, strategic, and visionary educational leadership, and there's 3 bullet points under there. I'm looking at the next superintendent criteria. It doesn't have a date on it, but it's linked in the evaluation. And so a demonstrated ability to articulate and act upon a future-focused strategic vision that prepares each PPS graduate for post-secondary pathway, and we could evaluate that based on whether that's been delivered upon. I guess that's like a yes/no question.
Okay.
I believe you can.
Yep. Right. So,
So the next question is, sounds like Dr. Adams needs time to refine this. What is the latest that we can get this to the board for you to look at for the 8th?
October 8th seems like a really fast turnaround, especially with the board review date.
yeah,
So October
Ooh.
22nd,
22nd.
session, work session is what?
But then we would need to get that.
Ahead of time, by how long? A week? Or 10 days?
If we move to October 22nd, yes. Yep.
10 days?
Yep.
Okay.
So October 12th, have everything to you by October 12th.
Interesting pivot.
I don't have a calendar in front of me, but we'll make it happen.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other board business? All right.
No.
This meeting is adjourned. Go home.